For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. I've been teaching the LSAT for about 15 years, and I'm joined tonight by Elizabeth Madigan from Brooklyn Law School. Hi, Liz. How you doing?
Hi. Great. Thanks for joining all of us tonight. Thank you so much.
Of course, Liz. Do you want to share a little bit about your background and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, as was mentioned, I work at Brooklyn Law School. I'm Associate Director of Admissions there. I've been there for a little over 3 years now. I graduated law school 8 years ago now. I worked for a few years in criminal law, and then I worked in tax law, and now I'm in admissions. So I, do a lot of different things, recruitment, I read files, I'm on the admissions committee, I work with the scholarship committees, I participate in different types of marketing and putting on different events. So a lot of different things. And I think I'm actually a good example of how versatile a law degree can be. So any questions as to that, I'm always happy to answer as well.
Yeah, it's funny just how much of a generalist degree the law degree can be. It's such a wide variety of options. So I thought that tonight we could cover a couple of things LSAT specific as they intersect with admissions, and then zoom out to other admissions topics. And then of course, opening it up to any questions that anyone has. Again, feel free to type them in the chat. One question I want to jump off with is LSAT cancellations, because it seems to me almost that cancellations on the LSAT are almost vestigial, like they're no longer a necessary option for students. Like they're a requirement back from the days when law schools averaged multiple LSAT scores. There was a big downside to having a lower LSAT score on your record. But now that virtually every law school no longer takes the average and only takes the highest, in what cases would you say a cancellation is warranted, and how do you typically look at LSAT cancellations?
It's a good question because, as you said, applicants, most schools do take the highest score, or we've mainly evaluate the highest score. With that said, we see all the scores. And that always kind of makes me pause. Let's say somebody scored quite low, and then they took the test again and they did like 10 points higher, and then the third time they scored even 10 points higher than that. It always makes me think, how valuable really is the LSAT in terms of predicting, let's say, law school or lawyer success. But the fact is, it is a learnable test. So, we'll see that this person, let's say, started off with a score that was really not quite strong, but they really did improve it. So we do see everything. With that said, if we do see a cancellation, I don't really think much of it because, now the score reports, we'll see, people taking it anywhere between 2 and let's say 4 or 5 times. There might be a C in there somewhere. C is the cancellation. I really don't think much of it. But if you really think that, your score, you took the exam and you really are not happy with it, and you think that you don't want to see that on there, I wouldn't agonize too much about it. Honestly, I would say just see what happens, see what the score is, because we see so much of it. And as you said, we really do just evaluate the highest score. We'll see every score anyway, but that's what, we primarily care about. That's what we have to report to U.S. News, to the American Bar Association. So you don't really lose much, frankly.
Right. So one cancellation, you don't think too much of it. But what if you see 2 cancellations, or just to go extreme on it for a second, like 3 or 4 cancellations?
Yeah, we'll see that. And that's true. I always say, take the exam again. A lot of people take it more than once. But if we see that you've taken it 7 times, or if you've canceled like 3 or 4 times, that just shows, again, we see the whole history. So even, we want people that have good scores for all types of reasons, but we also don't want people that either aren't, studying to their fullest potential, or are just taking the exam for whatever reason, or maybe honestly have some type of neurotic personality. That does not look good, for sure.
Of course. And I like what you said about retaking as well, because to me, because they're not averaging multiple scores, you're only taking the highest, there's not really a downside to retaking. If you could do even just a couple of points better, that could lead to thousands in scholarship money.
Exactly.
Or getting into a better school.
Exactly.
Could you talk a little bit about what kinds of scholarship money, another point or two on the LSAT, could lead to?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I say that verbatim, even 1 or 2 points could mean, thousands of dollars in scholarship money. Obviously I can't kind of divulge how the scholarship committee at Brooklyn Law School in particular awards scholarships, but every school definitely will take to some extent your LSAT score into account when they're awarding merit scholarships. For us, it's definitely one of the things that we throw into the big so-called cauldron of, are we admitting you and how much money are we giving you if we do admit you? But it could mean, with everything else in your application, literally it could mean like up to sometimes $10,000 a year more in scholarship. And that's just kind of a ballpark number. It could be less, it could be even more, frankly. If you think that you could score higher, definitely take it again.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Now, I've got some stats on this that are not Brooklyn Law specific, don't worry, but did some research. There's a journal called The American Economist, and in the fall of 1998, they did a study on the value of 1 point more on the LSAT. And they said in 1998 dollars, 1 point more was equal to $2,600. $2,600. And in today's dollars, that would be $4,000. The value of 1 point at the time you get that point. Yeah. Then over the course of your entire career, with returns on interest and everything, that could scale significantly.
Yeah, sure.
So does that seem reasonable to you, that 1 point could equal $4,000 in terms of salary upon graduation or scholarship money?
Oh, I mean, salary upon graduation, maybe, because, that's assuming that you went to, let's say, a different school entirely. That's the only way it would really play out in that way. And so, frankly, if you get 1 or 2 points higher, you could either, and again, every school is different, but in a lot of cases, you could either get, a couple more $1,000s at X school, or you could be getting into now Y school, which could then result in, let's say Y school places better at law firms or clerkships or whatever it is that you want to do. So it could open doors in a lot of different ways. And to be honest, if you're staying at X school and getting a couple $1,000s more per year, that's a couple $1,000s less that you have in loans that is then capitalized over your entire life, frankly, for a lot of law students when you're taking out loans, or at least 25 years of it, depending on how long your loan repayment terms. So yeah, it's definitely worth it. And especially if you're taking into account kind of the time value of money, take it again. If you think you can do better, if we see an applicant that's taken it 5 times and they get the same score each time, we don't really hold it against them, but I just feel bad for them, frankly.
Of course. No, it can be quite a slog, but
yeah,
as we're discussing, there is real money at stake here. And so you see the stats from LSAC that the average person on a retake improves 2.8 points on average, approximately 3 points to round it. That's still a lot of money. That's $12,000.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. 2 points doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a very big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, all right. So we've covered that one pretty much in depth, but I thought it was important to cover.
Yeah, great.
Now, talking a little bit about, relatedly, the rankings. Now, everyone looks at the rankings. You mentioned them earlier, but I'm wondering to what extent are they truly useful when choosing a law school? Because there are other things to consider, like placements, specialty areas, and such. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the value of going to a regional law school like Brooklyn Law and how students might want to look in factors other than rankings specifically.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned them, and that's what I always say, in terms of how strong a school is, in a certain region, or, if I always say, if you want to, let's say, work in oil and gas litigation, go to Texas, go to law school there. Don't go to Brooklyn Law School. So, things like that. Or, if, for example, so what I always say is, really do the research. Rankings can be helpful. If you get into Harvard Law School, go to Harvard Law School. There's no two ways about it. With that said, let's say you want to work at a specific office, a specific law firm, in a specific sector, in a specific city. What you should do is you should find out, where did all those people come from? What law school did they go to? You'll be surprised. Yeah, there's usually some people from the top law firms, but then you'll see maybe like 80% of people come from a specific regional law school that, is a lot cheaper and gets you a lot of connections. So it really just depends. What I always say is look at rankings within a specific subject area, as you mentioned. There's a lot of different ways to find that. U.S. News is really just kind of a general ranking that whose methodology is not really public. So it is useful in the sense that it's relied on by the entire industry. So students or potential students say, well, this school is ranked better than that, let's say. So maybe more qualified students will tend to go to X school over Y school. So it kind of perpetuates itself. But in terms of, I want to go to a school that, I want to be a prosecutor. Well, shameless plug, Brooklyn Law School is the #1 school in the country for prosecutors and public defenders. So, according to Pre-Law Magazine. So there's Pre-Law Magazine, there's Brian Leiter's law school report. There's a bunch of others. So you want to really look at all these different types of rankings, and ideally they back up the school that feels right for you. You want to look at, where do all the alumni go? So things like that, I think are a lot more valuable.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. And I was especially interested to hear about Brooklyn Law and the criminal law. So could you share a little bit more about what the offerings you have with regard to prosecution and defense?
Yeah, so one of the things that definitely puts Brooklyn Law on the map, one of the rankings at which we often, frankly, do very well in are experiential learning opportunities. And that is basically referring to our clinics and externships. And clinics are our in-house law firms. If you're applying to law school, you're going to see the word clinic come up over and over and over again. It's definitely kind of a rising buzzword. We are kind of in the court district of Brooklyn. So we have always had a ton of clinics. So like I said, they're in-house law firms. So you do all the work of being a lawyer, you interview clients, you file and argue motions before a judge, you negotiate settlements with opposing counsel, you do all of it. So we have partnership clinics with the DA's office, U.S. Attorney's office. You can spend a semester at legal aid. And this is true for Brooklyn or for New York County or for the Bronx County, wherever you want to be. You can get credit for it while you're still, in school. And so you're making connections, you're learning skills. We have partnerships with the Exoneration Initiative. We also have a appellate defense clinic as well as a trial level defense clinic. If you will not run out of things to do, that's for sure. And the good thing is that, if you want to do something like that, there isn't as much kind of friction and competition for the same positions because we have so many opportunities. So it's a really supportive environment.
That's really awesome to hear. And I imagine that being located in New York, of course, all those partnerships are readily accessible.
Yeah, they're across the street.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, downtown Brooklyn, you have the courthouse and everything.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of experiential learning and getting out of the school for a bit, what are you looking for from applicants with regard to extracurricular activities? And someone who wants to practice, let's say, criminal law, what would you expect them to have some kind of exposure to the field prior to attending, if they talk about it in their personal statement, for example?
Yeah. So what do I look for? So in general, I'll start with that part. So what do we look for in terms of experience? And I'll speak just generally for law school first. Frankly, it's literally anything. It doesn't have to be law related. You don't have to have worked as a paralegal. If you're interested in criminal law, let's say, I don't expect there to be criminal law experience. If you do have that, that's great. If your personal statement is saying that this is a passion you've had your whole life, then I want to see it on your resume. But, whatever you did before law school, that's okay. It doesn't have to be legal. That's one of the great things about law school is that people come to law school having done so many different things. We want to see that you're really active in your community in whatever way that is. So whether it's being really involved in a student organization, or having some amazing internships, or working 3 jobs, whatever it is, we want to see that you're really engaged, that you're a busy bee. We don't just want to see that we don't want students that are going to go to school and then just go right home. We want people that will contribute to the life of the campus. Now, as I said, if you are saying that you have loved the law your whole life and, that you knew from a young age this is what you wanted to do, but there's absolutely nothing of that on your resume, then that's a red flag. So Other than that, just, if you're really interested in dance, that's great. I want to see your resume full of dance. So whatever it is, do you, because once you get to law school, that part of your life will not be able to be explored as much, let's say. You'll be busy.
Yeah, of course. Now, what are you looking for in terms of the personal statement? Do you want people to be talking about these experiences? Is it enough for them to be on the resume? How should they tell you about them?
So personal statement, it depends. So first of all, read the prompt very carefully. At Brooklyn, you can write about literally anything. Some schools will say, tell us why you want to be a lawyer, or tell us why you want to go to this specific law school. So it really depends. If they say, why you want to be a lawyer, then you have to make sure you answer that. For us, and a lot of schools have a very open prompt where you could write about literally anything. Don't feel the need to, to tell us why you really want to go to law school. If there's a different side of yourself that you want us to see, it's your opportunity to let us hear how you write, how you think, that you have a unique perspective and voice to bring to our campus, unique experiences. So that's really what I look for. Do not restate your resume. That will sink an application. So most schools will tell you they view applications holistically, so every component matters. What that means is that even if you have great LSAT and GPA, if you have a bad personal statement, it's going to be an uphill battle to get in. And I definitely feel that way. I think writing is really important, especially when the prompt is open, because that in itself tells us a lot about who you are, because it's hard to pick just one thing to talk about. And so that decision of, what you chose is really kind of a big judgment call that we want to see how you rise to meet that challenge. So do not restate your resume. Now, if you have something on your resume in particular that sparks your interest for the law, or is, really more significant than just a line item on your resume, then by all means talk about it. But don't tell me that, you did mock trial in high school and then you studied poli-sci because you thought that would, be great for the law. And then you took this one class that you really liked and you did this internship, because I can see all of that. And it's a big no-no. Every law school representative will tell you that.
Totally. And I'm so glad you mentioned the mistake of laundry listing on the personal statement, because that's one I see a lot when I work with applicants as well. I can't tell you how many times they start chronologically with either high school or college, or even worse, childhood. Yeah. And they just list all these unrelated things that are just, all they have in common is they happen to you.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's like, pick the most important thing and go in depth on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that really shows us who you are. Yeah. And it doesn't, I always say it's not so much even what you talk about, but how you talk about it. So even if, frankly, I see a lot of people that want to, I don't mean to be cynical, but they want to help the world, help people. And some of it comes off and makes me feel like it's trite, and I've read it 100 times. And then some of it I really, really believe, and it's unique. So it's a lot about, like I said, how you say it.
Of course. Yeah. You don't want the ones that come across as somewhat naive and lacking any real world experience that connects to the stated goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we actually have someone in the chat who said they want to practice international law, international human rights law, which perhaps is a valid goal, but at the same time, I've seen iterations of that run into exactly that naive save the world sort of thing. And so I'm wondering, maybe we can help this applicant potentially frame that in a more productive way. So could you talk about international law? Do you get applications that talk about that? And how do you typically view that?
Yeah. So yeah, we do. And it's funny because a lot of people think that, because of what's, going on lately in the news, especially in the last few years, that, when they say international law, they're actually talking about immigration law, for example. So the first general point is do your research. If you're going to talk about, the specific fields of law that you want to be in, that you're really passionate about, even if you didn't do it before, but now you really feel passionate about it, make sure you're calling it the right thing. Because that just shows, again, that, as you said, kind of some naivete. And as I said, you don't need to be an expert on it, but if you've read at least a few articles, you'll know it's called immigration law. as opposed to, let's say, international human rights law. Now, if you're really interested in international human rights law or really any field of law, there should be something that that you're talking about that sparks that interest, and you don't necessarily have had to work in that field. It could be something new for you, but I want to know why. I want to know what sparked your interest. Even if it's something, in the news, that's okay. That's great. That's why a lot of people are inspired to go to law school. Just make sure you're talking about the right thing. And let me think. Specifically to international human rights law, I would say that because it is such a kind of specific field, as opposed to, let's say, like criminal law or corporate law, I would recommend, frankly, doing some specific research about the schools that you're applying to, and seeing, what programs they have for that. So we have an international human rights fellowship. So, I don't think that you should necessarily say, I can't wait to be involved in this international human rights fellowship, because that always feels like you're kind of playing to, trying too hard. But seeing that there are opportunities at the school, and maybe weaving that in somehow to your essay, and talking about the opportunities that you hope to kind of take advantage of, could really help. And again, shows that you've done the research, that you've really thought about it.
Of course. I mean, that seems perfectly reasonable to me. If you're applying to a school and you have this goal, you should do the homework to see if that school offers what it is that you want to do. You don't want to show up at a school that you want to show up at Brooklyn Law with the goal of oil law, as you said.
Exactly.
That would just show a lack of research.
Yeah.
Now, to switch gears a little bit, what about the resume? Let's switch gears and talk about that. So what's the page limit that you're typically looking for? Is it typically one page, as I often recommend, or what warrants going over one page?
Yeah, one page, definitely. One page, totally agree. It has to be professional resume. Resume is my favorite thing to talk about, because it's the part of the application that I feel always gets kind of the last look. People think that, I don't know why, but I always see the worst kind of typos, the worst formatting, the worst editing, the oddest choices in general. It should look professional, If you're going to start a Brooklyn Law School, within 3 months, you could be applying to a federal judge as a Brooklyn Law School student. And we want to make sure that you represent Brooklyn Law School professionally. Times New Roman, no weird font or colors or pie charts. I have just a list of basically don'ts for resume, if you don't mind.
Sure, please go ahead.
No, no objectives at the top. We know what your objective is. It's to go to law school. And almost every time I see an objective, it's about like getting a job somewhere. So you can tell that they just used their resume from something else. No kind of summary of your skills, like no highly motivated, fast learner, quick thinker, extreme attention to detail. Don't tell me, show me. If you tell me you're a fast learner, I'd rather see on your resume, for example, that you were promoted within a few months at a certain position, for example. If you say everybody that has attention to detail will have some type of typo or weird formatting issue. If I see an immaculate resume, I'll say, wow, that person really pays a lot of attention to detail. It's better for, us to come up with that conclusion than for you to set a high expectation. If I see attention to detail, you better believe I will be going through that resume and personal statement with as fine a tooth comb as I can find. The other big thing for resumes is as you said a few minutes ago, it should be the best things on there. I'm sure that you have more than one page to fill up, but it should only be a page because it should really be the best things you did. And in general, I don't want to see anything before college, because that was at least 4 years ago, depending on when you're applying to law school. And it also sends a signal to us that you haven't done enough in the last 4 years to fill up a resume. There's a few exceptions always. Let's say you started a nonprofit that is the passion that you want to go into, specifically in high school. Definitely include that. Maybe you were like a top oralist in mock trial in high school. You can include that. Use your judgment. Obviously, every rule has exceptions, but definitely keep it to the most recent things. my overall resume don'ts.
Makes a lot of sense. And I've often heard it said that the law school resume should be academic rather than career-oriented or professional. But then you said professional at the beginning of this conversation about the resume. So I'm wondering if you see a difference between the types of resume being academic versus professional. Should undergrad be first?
When I say professional, I mean like professionally presented.
Right.
So my mistake. Like it should.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it should look like a professional, created it, but it should be everything. So as I said, we want people that will really contribute to the life of our communities, of our law school. So that, involves a lot of different things. We also want people that will succeed in the classroom. So obviously, I always see, and I always prefer, I think, that the education should be first, just because it's just kind of makes sense. Obviously, depending on when you graduated as well. If you graduated 20 years ago, maybe that doesn't make the most sense. But after that, your experiences should be a kind of combination of, how I see it, should be a combination of internships, jobs, volunteer work, whatever it is that you did that filled up the most of your time. I don't need to know about a babysitting job unless it was like your passion and now you want to work in children's law and it's what you did with most of your time. It should really be what you do with most of your time. So if you are really involved in a religious organization, that's not academic, that's not work related, but it speaks to what you care about, ideally. So it should be a mix of all of them, really.
Right. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the letters of recommendation. Mm-hmm. How many are you looking for, and who should they be from?
So every school is different. So make sure that you, do your research. Some schools, for example, don't require any letters of recommendation. So just be aware of that. We require 2, but we accept up to 4. And ideally, we have at least 2 that are academic. So from professors. Now, if you are more than 1 or 2 years removed from undergrad or any graduate school you've had, that's fine. We don't necessarily expect that you've kept up in touch with your professors. And furthermore, it's not necessarily the best reflection of who you are today. So don't feel the need to kind of, find a professor from 10 years ago, because that letter of recommendation is going to say that professor is going to go home and like, look what grade he gave you. And maybe, what grade he gave you on some of the papers. Maybe he'll have a copy of your paper and he'll maybe summarize that in his letter of recommendation. It doesn't tell us anything really. So again, don't feel the need to submit it unless you really think it'll be good. But if you are still in school or a year out of school and I don't see at least 2 academic letters of recommendation, I'm going to raise an eyebrow.
Of course. So it's good to hear. So let's talk about timing in the cycle. Now, I know there typically aren't really hard deadlines that law schools, of course, more on a rolling admissions basis. When is too late? Obviously, we're speaking right now towards the end of January.
Yeah.
Is it too late to take the LSAT in February and still apply? Is there a hard cutoff, and if so, when?
So again, every school is different. So yeah, we, I think, have kind of one of the latest deadlines, which is no deadline. It's basically until classes start in August, unless we fill up earlier. But we have a priority deadline of March 1st. And really, and I think this will apply to a lot of schools, the main deposit deadlines are all in April. So that's why we kind of have a priority deadline of March 1st. If you find, if you apply by March, hopefully we can get you a decision in a few weeks, although we really can't promise that. But you're going to need to start making decisions in April. So ideally, you're visiting schools in March. You're really thinking about these types of things in March at the latest, and that still gives you time. So it's really to your benefit to apply earlier, to apply, not much later than, let's say, February, just for those reasons. Because, if you apply much later, then that means that the bulk of our class has already put down deposits. So you're at a disadvantage in terms of spots in the class, in terms of scholarship money available, need-based grants available. There are usually still spots, past March or April, but as I said, you're just not in the best position.
Of course. And we got a question about how financial aid changes if you apply later in the cycle. Is there a point at which there's significantly less available and it's not it's worth waiting to apply the next cycle instead towards the beginning?
Yeah. So financial aid is there's every school is different. For us, at least, so financial aid with respect to loan amounts. So let's say federal loans, that it doesn't matter when you're applying. The federal government will give you the same amount of money that the school approves, basically, up to the limit that the school approves for cost of attendance. But we have, for example, need-based grants, and that money runs out every year, sometime between May and July. And that's based on demonstrated need, and those range from $1,000 to $12,000 per year. So if you are applying later in the cycle, and you can't apply for those anymore because that money will have run out. And the same is true for merit scholarships, although that is a much more kind of dynamic and fluid pool of money. But that money does tend to run out again sometime in the summer when our class is really full. That money has been committed. We can no longer really give it out. So it affects everything, spots in the class as well as money.
Right. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Now, you mentioned about visiting the school in the spring. Now, I'm in New York. You are in New York. A lot of applicants watching right now are also in New York. Do you expect them to have visited campus, and do you track that kind of thing? Do you track if they've taken tours or sat in on classes, that kind of thing?
So you mean once they're admitted, or before they've been admitted?
Prior, like in terms of demonstrating interest and doing their due diligence.
We frankly yes, we do track it, but we don't look at that when we're making the decisions, because we don't want to put at a disadvantage anybody that can't make that trip. So that's kind of a strict policy that we have. We just feel like it's not fair to everybody, especially because we're a school that attracts so many people from around the country. We don't feel that it's fair to kind of give advantage to those students that are local. So yes, we do track it. If we have a particularly, good experience with you, frankly, I actually try to not let that impact my admissions decision, which I know is counterintuitive, but frankly, I might not always be good at that. But we do strive for that, again, just to ensure fairness to everybody.
Of course, that makes sense. But I could still see it making sense for the applicant to visit, because if you're going to spend 3 years here, you should at least see if you like the place and see if you like the feel and everything.
Definitely visit before you put down a deposit, or definitely visit before you attend. If you can visit before you even apply, that's great. I know it's hard to do that. It all costs money, but applications cost money. They cost time and stress. If you have less kind of if you just apply to, kind of spray your applications everywhere, and, then at the end of the day, you have, 15 schools that you need to choose from, then it's really difficult. So the more legwork you can do earlier, that's always helpful. But obviously, it just depends on availability and travel and all that stuff. I get that.
Right. We actually got a question from an applicant saying their sister went to Brooklyn Law School.
Oh,
does that give them an advantage?
So when I'm reading an application, I have the same exact policy as I just said. I say no. I try really rigorously to not let that impact my decision at all, frankly. We think it's great that there is kind of that family presence and family commitment, and we always like to see that. But if you are a strong applicant, we're going to want you to come. If we think you're going to succeed in our classroom and contribute to our community, we're going to want you to come. And if we don't think you'll succeed, basically having the fact that your sister went there will not push you over the edge.
Okay. Wow. Very, very fair. Very fair. Okay. We have a couple of questions related to things we covered previously in the conversation, a couple on letters of rec. One is, can an applicant reuse a letter of rec from a few years ago that maybe it mentioned applying in an earlier cycle? Could it be reused?
I don't really hold that against an applicant, especially if it's, let's say, if it's an academic letter of recommendation that they got, when they were fresh out of undergrad, and now they're applying, let's say, 2 or 3 years later, because at least, we'll have something that speaks to the academic potential of the applicant. But, if it's more than that, if it's like 5 years ago, again, it just doesn't really tell us much about who you are. I'd much rather have a letter of recommendation from somebody that's not a professor that knows you really well, that can speak specifically, specific instances, why you're so amazing, not just that you're amazing. The more specific you can be in a letter of recommendation, the better. So those are usually closer in time to the time of application. Like I said, the one exception is if it's, let's say, a professor that you had that wrote the letter of recommendation closer in time to when you took the class, let's say.
And I'm seeing a connection here in terms of the letter of rec and the personal statement or the resume where someone's using superlatives versus demonstrating that. So a letter of rec that also just simply laundry lists positive adjectives or attributes is not as good as one that shows specific examples of each.
Yeah, what I'll even say in my when I'm making notes for the admissions committee when I meet with the admissions committee is no info letter of recommendation. I really want specifics. What I always say is I recommend meeting with the person that you want to recommend you, and oh, professor, I really loved that paper I wrote or that presentation I did about X, Y, and Z. Jog their memory, help them remember. They're going to write you a better letter of recommendation, because then they're going to say, oh yeah, I really did like the work that, John did on that. So I just think that's a trick that might help.
For sure. No, I could see the vague ones is more like damning the student with faint praise in a way.
Yeah, listen, it's not, if your application is strong, but for that, it's not fatal, but it's not going to help you.
Right. Relatedly, we got a great question from an applicant asking, what components would show that a student would not succeed at Brooklyn Law? So are there certain things in the application that would prevent someone from attending? Are there certain red flags that you often see on applications?
Frankly, every component really matters. So there's, in every component of the application, you could mess it up. But you could also show that you can succeed. So, don't take that so kind of negatively. Obviously, if you don't have a good LSAT, we might think maybe you won't pass the bar. We don't just look at your GPA is kind of the next big component is always GPA. We don't just look at the GPA. We look at literally every class you took. Did your grades go up over time? What were your majors and your minors? Did you challenge yourself? So for example, for that, if I see that, you never really committed to an academic course, or if I see that to an academic trajectory, or if I see that you just weren't able to get good grades and you graduated very recently, then that will make me think, I don't know if you'll be able to succeed, especially given the kind of rigorous demands of law school. Personal statement, how could you mess that up? Everything I talked about earlier, bad grammar, bad editing, bad choice of topic, if it's unprofessional, resume, everything I said earlier, all the don't do that. So all of these things, letter of recommendation. The other thing I forgot to mention about letter of recommendation, I don't care, and this is true for all admissions professionals, who is recommending you. So it does not behoove you to ask your family friend who's a lawyer or who's a judge to send I've known Sarah since she was 4 years old, and she's a fine young woman. That's a no info letter of recommendation. So I'd much rather hear from, let's say, the law clerk of a judge that you interned for than from the judge, because the law clerk, with whom you principally worked, will be able to tell me all about the memo that you wrote for him, the good ideas that you had during the trial, things like that. So a lot of different things can help you, and frankly, a lot of different things can hurt you.
Speaking of things that could hurt you, we got a question in the chat about character and fitness. So character and fitness, we didn't cover that one yet. Are there certain incidents that will simply prohibit someone from ever attending, and how should they be addressed? For example, academic plagiarism.
We consider those much more serious than, let's say, arrests or any type of kind of discipline at school or with any kind of interactions with law enforcement, let's say. It comes to an issue of, moral fitness, moral character, right? So we consider bottom line, no matter what it is, whether it's category A or category B that I just talked about, be honest, disclose everything. If you don't know yet, once you do apply to a state bar to be admitted to practice law, after you've gone to law school, after you've taken the bar, after you've paid for law school, taken out loans your whole life that you'll be paying your whole life, then the bar runs a criminal background or a full background check, and they compare it to your law school application. So if they see something on your background check that you did not disclose, now it's an uphill battle to be admitted. The whole thing is about truth. You are an officer of the court once you're an admitted attorney, and your entire reputation rests on, as I said, your moral fitness, your moral character. So things like DUIs, we see a lot. Traffic tickets, we see a lot. Some people will say, do I need to disclose speeding tickets, parking tickets? Yes, just disclose it. Say, even if you don't know, I got a speeding ticket in upstate New York in the summer of 2014. That's all I know. That's okay. Just talk about that. DUIs, as I said, we see a lot, or drug arrests, honestly, we see from time to time. And that happens, and just explain it. Don't excuse it. We don't need a full essay, just 2 or 3 sentences. Sometimes we get full essays about how people have kind of reformed their lives and it was a dreadful mistake they'll never make again. And sometimes that makes sense. But if it's about like a noise ordinance that they broke their first week of freshman year, and I see how you've looked back with shame on that time in your life, don't overdo it. It's totally fine. Now, issues with respect to academic honesty are much more serious, and our admissions committee will work kind of on overdrive to decide those kinds of questions, but you absolutely have to be honest, and frankly sometimes they can be disqualifying. So just be honest, and it is what it is. There's not much more to say about that.
In a way, I would imagine it's better to just fully address everything and in detail if necessary, depending on the nature of it. For example, plagiarism, like if it was, for example, like reusing a paper from one class for another class without reference or asking permission, versus like copy pasting from the internet or from another student.
Yeah. There's some cases where, we will allow that person, where they kind of went through some type of rehabilitative process in their school, and, they're now certified as students of good standing. And there's some situations like that, for example, we had a student that was collaborating on a problem set that didn't know he wasn't allowed to do that. And so, that's different than just, stealing a paper from somewhere online. So there are different circumstances. They're not all disqualifying, but they are all, they should all be disclosed because it is the most serious thing, I think.
For sure. One question I get a lot from students related to this is if they got in trouble for something in college, but they don't know if there was like a paper record of the event. They often consider that a gray area where they're not really sure if they need to disclose or they could get away without disclosing it. Would you recommend disclosing in those cases as well?
Yeah, when in doubt, disclose. Again, everything can possibly come up when you're applying to work as a lawyer after you've graduated law school. When in doubt, disclose. You don't want to be kind of having to make the argument to the state bar examiners that, you didn't think it mattered, but it was something negative that maybe now it looks like you were trying to hide it. And in many cases, we'll see that students will report something, and then we require what's called a dean certification form, which is a letter from your school's administrative offices telling us, that what happened, basically confirming what you said. And a lot of cases, they'll say that there was not even disciplinary action, and that's great. That's fine. Or in some cases there was, and, they talk about what the outcome was, and you could talk about, how you reformed yourself. When in doubt, disclose.
Right. Agreed. Thanks. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about like numbers. Like, are there hard GPA LSAT cutoffs? Will you consider an application with a 135? Like, will you look at that despite the low LSAT score?
Yeah. So and every school is different, but we read every single application front to back. LSAT is a component like everything else. So it's not a bad score is not necessarily dispositive. What it does tell me is, you might not be doing so well on standardized tests. And why does that matter? Because the bar exam is a standardized test. So it's just one of the components. We have no cutoffs.
Wow, that's great to hear. Now, what about if there's a big discrepancy, like a super high LSAT, a super low GPA, or vice versa, the whole splitter and reverse splitter thing? How do you look at that when you see such a big distance between those numbers?
Yeah, it all helps. So what that tells me is probably, let's say you have a bad LSAT or lower LSAT and a really great GPA, that again, that you're not so great at standardized tests, but that, I could make the argument that you have really still very strong academic potential. I would still like to see, frankly, that let's say you do have a 135 LSAT, you shouldn't apply to Brooklyn Law School knowing our numbers with a 135 LSAT having taken it once. We want to see that you're trying hard to, take it again, to study. We want to see that, that you study hard, that you care, that you want to, work on things. If you can't seem to increase it, that's a different story. But yeah, and the reverse, if you have a lower GPA, but a higher LSAT, again, that's an argument to make that, maybe it's an argument that the applicant should make that, for whatever reason, he or she didn't do so well in undergrad or graduate school, but X, Y, and Z has happened, and now, they will do better. And ideally, the writing their personal statement is shows tip-top writing, shows that there really is true academic potential. So try to make up for it in other ways. And a good LSAT will show that, maybe, some will argue that you're still really smart. So it all helps kind of make that argument to the admissions committee, but it depends on how you frame it. You should definitely submit an addendum explaining either why you had a poor LSAT or why you had poor GPA. True.
And the answer so often is, with a low LSAT score, retake, to circle back to the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that LSAC is offering more frequent test dates than ever before, and they just released the dates for the upcoming cycle. Mm-hmm. We've got something like 9 or 10 LSATs per year now. And in the current cycle, there's still February and March and April all available to us going forward. Let's say someone wants to apply this cycle right now, and they've only had low LSAT scores up to this point. Would you tell them, take it in February or take it in March and apply this cycle if they're okay with the timing? Or would you say wait until next cycle? All else being equal.
I mean, frankly, if they've taken it many times recently, I always say, take a break. There's definitely, and you probably know this much better than I do, but I've seen it just in terms of kind of what I see in score reports. There's definitely burnout. Sometimes you need to take a few months off. Taking it every single month, which this might encourage some people to do, frankly, is sometimes your score even goes down. And that just doesn't look great. So if you've been taking it every month and your score is not going up, I say, wait, take it next year, take a few months off, and then start over again.
Oh, for sure. No, I wasn't going to say take it all 3 of those test dates, February, March, April. Definitely not. I would say space it out.
Of timing.
And just in terms of timing in general.
Yeah, so the last one that we kind of officially accept is the March LSAT. With that said, you're still a bit later in the cycle, because, you might not get your results until the end of April, let's say, or even May. And so there's just less spots, again, less money to go around. But if you really feel that you can increase it, even 2 or 3 points, then go for it. We don't prejudice you at all if you apply this year and apply again in September, let's say. So again, you don't really lose anything, as we were saying earlier.
Of course. And for those wondering, all LSATs are equal in difficulty. No one month is harder or easier than another. What do you think of these new LSAC retake limits they just introduced last year, limiting the number of times an applicant can take it in a cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have more experience than I do, but I think it's a good thing, because when they are offering so many more administrations, it's going to cause people to kind of just take it. Let me see if I could just do better. And, even you and I are saying, yeah, take it again. It's okay. But really take it again once you've studied, once, you're kind of really feel that you can do better. Don't just take it, to take it. So I think, frankly, I think it makes sense. I think it's a good thing. I think it will kind of make people less test crazy and test happy, and really make it so that every administration is more valuable to the applicant.
Of course. And for those wondering, I've done a number of classes on retake prep specifically. They're on the YouTube channel if anyone wants to check them out. Well worth it, because it's important, as we've been saying all along over the course of this evening. Now, switching gears again, just to cover every part of the application, there's the writing sample. Mm-hmm. And LSAC just recently made it digital, and so it's no longer part of test day. And they also, even more recently, separated it from the LSAT score so that law schools can see your LSAT score even before they've received a completed writing sample. And so I'm seeing some people asking me, does that mean I don't have to do the writing sample anymore? Can I get away with just submitting my LSAT score and application, and law schools might not notice or they might not care? How do you look at writing samples, and what would you say to that student?
Yeah, so every school is different. Again, for us, your application's actually not considered complete unless we receive your writing sample. So you cannot get away with it. Definitely submit it. It will hold up your application, which nobody wants. And there's no reason for that to happen, since you can kind of do it whenever. And the other big thing I'll say about that is that because it's now digital, it's typed, we can read all of them. So bad handwriting can't get you off the hook. And it's great. I really am excited about this because, there's a personal statement, which is, can be edited by whomever. And frankly, it should be edited. And I think you should have multiple people take a look at your personal statement. But, and it kind of shows us your polished writing, which is important because a lot of legal writing will have time to be edited on your own. But I want to make sure that you can spell, that you know grammar, that you can put together cohesive, coherent argument just on your own. So do not give it short shrift now more than ever.
Definitely. So complete the writing sample, please.
Definitely. Yeah.
One more thing I always love to ask, totally unrelated, before we wrap up for the evening. Personal statements, we've talked about them a bit over the course of the evening, but are there any great examples that you would cite as examples to live up to, or terrible personal statements to avoid at all costs? Any specific anecdotes come to mind from your time working in admissions?
I hesitate to say this because, again, I think it's a lot more about how you write than what you write about. But I always say, and this is such a just odd example, but the best personal statement I ever read was about an applicant was talking about the best way to bake a chocolate chip cookie. Not only because it spoke to my stomach, but he related it to, he talked about how he was kind of became obsessed with it, and how he kept trying to perfect his recipe and tweaking a little thing here and there every time, and how it became a kind of meditation for him. And he related it to other things in his life and how it allowed his mind to wander as he was kind of titrating amounts of flour or baking soda. And it was almost poetry, but it was written, so it was very personal. It was really unique. It was about nothing with respect to the law. And the best part was he didn't try to talk about law in the last paragraph, as some people often do. He just left it as a kind of standalone, really kind of out there, but just beautifully written essay, I'll say. So it just goes to show really it could be about anything. And worst, honestly, we see it all, but just most recently, so it just sticks out in my mind, I read a personal statement about somebody who was in a boy band in his youth. So when he was not even a teenager. And pretty much the whole essay was kind of reliving the glory days of his boy band stardom, which I didn't care about, was unimpressed by. And again, it showed me that there wasn't enough, since he was 11 years old, to talk about. He didn't even relate it to the law, didn't even try to. So it just seemed like he was living, 15 years in the past. So
it's like those 15 minutes of internet fame, just trying to brush that off again.
Really trying to just get all the mileage he could out of it. But I wasn't having it. Yeah.
And the funny thing about that cookie example, it's kind of reminding me of what we discussed earlier about showing extreme attention to detail. rather than telling it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much more powerful. Again, I come away thinking, wow, what a thoughtful person, what a unique thinker, whereas some people will put in their resume, thoughtful person, this way, again, yeah, as you said, show, don't tell.
Love it. Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure connecting with you. Thank you so much for sharing all your advice with applicants. Before we sign off, is there anything you want to share about Brooklyn Law specifically?
I definitely check out our website, come visit. We're right in the kind of, as I said, heart of the court district of Kings County of Brooklyn. So right across the street from every city, state, federal government agency, courthouse, you name it. So as I said, one of the things that we excel in is kind of that experiential learning. Clinics, externships, all of this means basically is a ton of experience, a ton of connections while you're still in law school. It's one of the things that makes our students so competitive nationally. We don't specialize in any one thing, but some of the things that we're known for are definitely public service law, as I mentioned, criminal law, immigration law, family law, things like that. Corporate law, we are very highly ranked. We have kind of connections in all the top law firms. We also are known for intellectual property, so sports, entertainment, pharmaceuticals, things like that, and international law. So come check us out.
Yeah, a lot of different areas of law to look into. Well, Thank you again, Liz. Sure. I apologize, we didn't get to everyone's questions tonight, but I assume they could reach out to you or I as appropriate to follow up on those?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please do.
What's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Is it through the site, the general admissions email?
Yeah, you can email me. It's my name, Elizabeth.Madigan, ELIZABETH.Madigan, MADIGAN @brooklaw.edu, BROOKLAW.edu. And I'll actually put that in the chat right now.
Yeah, sure.
There it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking the time, being so generous, sharing your experience and expertise with us. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight and asking so many great questions. And please keep in touch. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Yep. Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks to everyone that attended. Good night.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.